So Shabbat Shalom. I have two important questions. One is, are you a chicken person or an egg person? Which came first? Raise your hand for chicken. Raise your hand for egg. Okay, so we got a lot of eggs first, folks, here. That's fair enough. My second question is, do you want Torah or the joke? Raise your hand if you would like the Torah first. Raise your hand if you would like the joke first. Okay. Fair, I should have known with this crowd. Okay, so there's an incredible album from the 1960s called You Don't Have to Be Jewish. Okay? And the Cantor can groan because she doesn't, there's a piece of Jewish wisdom here. This is important, Cantor Keel, to understand. This came out in the 1960s. It's these little Yiddish Jewish bits of somewhat humor. I always laugh and chuckle, and now my children know the punchlines too. One in particular I share with you tonight is really important because not only is it the joke, but there's something more to it. Getting back to chicken and egg, you'll see in just a moment. So a man gets on an airplane and he sits down next to a woman, and the woman is holding a bundle. Does anyone know the joke so far? No? No? Okay. So she's holding a little bundle. The man sits down and he says, "Oh, lady, well, what is that?" She says, "It's my baby." She's just beaming, she's smiling, she pulls it back so she can show off her baby because she's ready to cavell, and the guy's like, "Oh my God, that's the ugliest baby I've ever seen." Anyone know this one yet? No? No? Okay. So she, of course, goes ballistic. "How dare you insult my baby? What kind of airline is this? You're awful." He's like, lady, what am I supposed to say? It's ugly. Look at the face on that thing. You sure you're not got it upside? I mean, he's going on. She's going on. It's turning into a thing. Remember, it's the 1960s in airlines, not 2023. Okay? So the stewardess comes running down, and she has this very Israeli Yenta, somewhat Jewish accent. "Hey, folks, we can't fight. We're on Israeli Airlines. We got to do this. You, sir, you go sit over there, and you, man, come sit down. Let me get you a pillow for your head, cup of tea for your nerves, and a banana for your monkey." Okay. Thank you. And Diane, you said you didn't know any Jewish wisdom. A banana for your monkey. Now, here's the chicken and egg part of it that will then lead me into Torah. Because wouldn't you know, I was listening to an episode of Radio Lab, highly recommend, wonderful, wonderful podcast, and they were talking about human beings taking animals at very young ages and trying to teach them human communication. And wouldn't you know, in the 1950s, a couple went to an animal sanctuary, got a baby monkey, and brought it to their lab, yes, on an airplane. A banana for your monkey on the airplane. So wait, I told you a joke, right? That's a fictional story. But yet I'm hearing on Radio Lab, and wait, it's a true story. So which came first? The true story about the monkey on the airplane, or in fact, the joke, and it just happens that sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Banana for your monkey. Brings me to Torah. Because in our Torah portion this week, we are starting the book of Leviticus. And so, quick reminder, we got 5 books of Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So we're heading into the middle of Torah: Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Dvarim. So we're starting into Vayikra. And it's fascinating as you open up the scroll. We'll see it tomorrow morning. I hope you will join us. Even if you can't come for the full daven, by about 10:15, we're starting the Torah service, and you can see it. The very first word of Vayikra, at the end of Vayikra, has a tiny, tiny aleph. The rabbis, of course, say, no, why is there a tiny aleph? Why is there a tiny aleph? The rabbis are asking this. They go back and forth. And one of the beautiful midrashim leads me back into this. Am I telling? Is it the silly story and the joke and the banana for the monkey, or is it that this couple actually had a monkey on an airplane? The chutzpah of doing that and looking at both two different complete sides. You've got fact and you've got story, and you have silliness and joke, and then you have the seriousness of trying to understand the human mind and animal mind and how we interact with each other. The rabbis teach that the aleph is little because it's a compromise. You see, it could have been Vayikra, which means that God came upon Moses. There is Moses out leading the people of Israel, and God happened to come across Moses in that moment and give Moses the rules that we are going to read in Leviticus. But the rabbis say that's not the only way you should look at it. It's Vayikra. God called to Moses. God's like, this is the time, this is the now. Moses, I'm calling to you. It wasn't just that Moses was going along and he and God happened to meet. It's in fact that God said, it's time. Two completely different viewpoints, two different ways. One is it was chance, it was this moment of Moses as he's moving through the world and he happens to connect with God. And then you have the other side of it where it is God controlling the action and the timing. This is God calling to Moses. One is Vayikra, one is Vayikra, and the rabbis say Moses wants to be humble and say it just kind of happened randomly, and God says, no, Moses, this is the time, and therefore, in order to favor God, there's an aleph, but able to acknowledge Moses, the aleph is very tiny. And so you get these two sides of the way of looking at it. We have the joke, and then you have the reality. You have Moses happening along in his humility, and it just happens to work out that way. And then you have God calling. Two completely different views going back and forth. I encountered the same way of seeing these different ways of dealing with the world in two different, very different stories. One was a Holocaust survivor. Her name is Edith Ebert. She was 14, 15, 16 years old during the Shoah. She went into Auschwitz, lied about her age, so she wasn't killed immediately. She goes on to survive, and she finds her way to the United States, and she goes on to become a psychologist, either psychologist or psychiatrist, specializing in trauma, especially trauma like the Holocaust. Truly incredible woman, getting interviewed by Maya Shankar, who is a behavioral scientist, who has a podcast called A Slight Change of Plans. And in the midst of the interview, Maya is talking with Edith, and Edie says, and they're talking, and then one of the things that her mother said is that the Nazis don't own you, you own them. An absolutely fascinating thing for her mom to say, and Edie put it very simply and said, look, if I let what was happening outside determine who I was, I would die in just a minute. But if I turned it around and I said, I'm free, I have myself, I have my heart, I have my love, I can take care of people, I can move through the world, they're the prisoners. Look at the misery that they are creating in the world for themselves and everybody else. They're the miserable ones. And she does this incredible twist and turn, turning it around and finding a way to find that freedom of will and spirit, even in the midst of that Holocaust, in order to survive. She says, it's in here, my freedom, my happiness, my power is in here, and I am going to push it out there. I was listening to this interview, and it's absolutely powerful and beautiful how often do Jill and I, as we're discussing the world, say you really have to find your happiness within. And that, yet, I was listening to a TED Radio Hour with A.J. Jacobs, and I believe you've heard me talk about that beautiful book, Thanks 1,000, about the cup of coffee. And he wants to thank everybody that is involved in his making his morning cup of coffee. And he's going to try to get up to 10,000 thank yous. Everybody from the people who grow the beans, to pick the beans, who shovel the beans, to who makes the cup, who drives the cup, who makes the water, all of the different pieces. He's going to thank everybody. And what he said, which was interesting and completely opposite of what Edie is saying, is he says, sometimes our brains get a little trippy. Sometimes we just kind of filter out stuff and we don't want to do stuff and we don't think it's going to have an impact, or we get so busy we just not stop thinking about the world. And he said one of the reasons he took on that project is he realized that sometimes you have to do actions that are not your norm, that are not regular, that are not comfortable, because you got to do the actions out here in order to trick your brain in here, that when you do stuff out here, that it starts to train and open up and unlock your brain to understanding and seeing the world in a different way. He's like, I don't feel like saying thank you, stopping and saying thank you to the barista, and yet after I started to do it every day and not just say thank you, but really look at the person, he said it was amazing change that happened in my life. Think about what I just said. Both sides of the same thing. Edie is saying, look in and push it out. And A.J. Jacobs says, no, you got to have the world out there and let the world out here and what happens out there shape what's in here. And it is so true in Judaism that we have these different ways. And I'm going to guess as I look around the room that some of you are really good at one side of the equation or the other. One side of the humility with Moses and the direction of God, or that finding happiness within, or of creating it from your actions out there. Some of you are much better at telling jokes and silly stories than telling the true story and finding the truth. Some of you like the comedy shows much more than the documentaries, and some of you only watch documentaries because who really wants to watch Mel Brooks? The chutzpah and the shanda. Okay. I love this teaching because not only do I get to remind you that both of those work, but I keep coming back to the Aleph. I keep coming not just to both sides of that equation to get us thinking about which one comes natural and which one do we have to push ourselves to do, but rather I love the little Aleph. I love the fact that I'm hoping I'm putting you on notice and that I'm putting myself on notice to really start paying attention in a little bit of a different way. I know we all have to pay attention a lot, but maybe just wake ourselves up a little bit, get our eyes open a little bit differently, a little bit of a different sensor, because that little Aleph tells us to flip the switch. There are little moments in our lives, little interactions we have with people, little moments that should trip us and say, it's Vayikra. We might get so driven in thinking, I've got to do the world out there and do the world out here to shape me inside that you forget to find the happiness within. We might be so driven that I'm going to control the world. I'm going to tell the world how it's going to work. I'm going to dictate that we forget to stop and let the world shape us and direct us. And we all need to look for in those moments of Aleph where we get so driven in our way of doing it that we forget the power and beauty of the other side. Aleph is a silent letter, and yet it carries so much weight. This little Aleph is so tiny, and yet it embodies so much that is so important as we move through the world. Here we are on this Shabbat, and you might have noticed I'm dealing with an Aleph. Did you notice? Because I'm not getting to do the services the regular way. What isn't working? The clicker. I don't have control over the PowerPoint. I've got to trust Nathaniel, somebody outside of myself, something beyond my control, to be able to flip the slide to match the pace of our reading. It happens to us all the time, but how often we miss that those little moments of that little Aleph that say, get out of your way and look at it from the other side, or look at it, let the world shape you, or let yourself shape the world. May each of us, whether we are called by God to do something, or whether we happen upon God in the midst of our going about, in the midst of us telling jokes, may we find truth in them. If we are telling the story of truth, may we find the joy or the silliness or that moment of connection and connection. May all of us, as we move through this world, see the beauty of both sides, but also find those special moments, those special triggers, that little Aleph that helps us move back and forth in powerful ways. Amen? Shabbat Shalom.